Bhushan, I am actually from another device. I have gone on the viewers link, but I cannot see anything.
Says we can start now. Should we?
Yes, Ritu, you can start.
Good morning, everyone. I welcome you all on behalf of the Pune chapter of IDVL. Today's CME is Clinical Rounds Part 2, and we have students from BJ Medical College, KEM Pune, and Markandeshwar Institute of Medical College, Ambala, who will present cases and case series on various topics. So, without further ado, I would like to invite our President, Dr. Dhaneshri Bide Madam, for the welcome note.
Thank you, Dr. Ritu. Good morning, dear friends and colleagues. On behalf of Team Pune chapter of IADVL, I welcome you all for this CME, where students from different institutes will present interesting cases. As you are aware, today we are observing World Leprosy Day, and we also have another program associated with this, that is e-release of brochure, which is a patient information brochure that will clear the misconceptions in the minds of layman about this important disease with lot of social stigma. Now, over the years, what we are observing is that the students nowadays are coming from all over India. Some of them are from places which are really remote places. Their undergraduate education is not done in English language. And because of that, these students, we find that even if they are really good in their academics, their clinical sense is also good. But these students always shy away from the limelight, and they always remain on the back foot. So what we thought that this can be a really good platform and can be a stepping stone in the career of these students, and that is why we have decided to give opportunity to students from different institutes. We are eager to do more such activities for all of you, all the students. I request them to volunteer, to contact their head of the departments, and you can approach us anytime. We are ready to accommodate all of you in due course of time. So look at it as a learning opportunity. This is not your exam. So be comfortable and present your work whichever way you can, because mistakes, they are bound to happen, and unless you make mistakes, you don't grow. So don't get scared, volunteer and do more such activities. We are there to help you. Now coming to the second part, today's second part. So we have another important activity, that is release of brochure. As I've told you, today we are observing World Leprosy Day, and we have prepared a brochure which was conceptualized by our team, and we have tried to answer all the frequently asked questions by the patient. We have translated it in Marathi also, and this can be a useful guide, or it can be very useful for all of you to counsel your patients in your busy practice. You can have it in a printout form. It is also available as a soft copy on our website, and it can be easily shared with your patients on WhatsApp. So make use of this brochure, because we have taken a lot of efforts to make it kind of foolproof. And during this process, Dr. Sudhakar Grandhi, who had worked in leprosy hospital for a long time, and Dr. Sharad Mutalik, they have given us a lot of inputs which were really useful while preparing the brochure. The entire design of the brochure was done by Mr. Advait Lele from Torrent Pharma, and we are really thankful to these three people who have helped us in making this brochure what you can see today. So to do the honors, we are lucky to have today with us none other than Dr. Yashwant Taude sir. Sir needs no introduction. He is professor and head of the department, KM Hospital, Pune, a teacher par excellence, a very humble person. He is always ready to help his students and colleagues in difficult situations. His phone call away. You always try and call him, and he will softly answer all your queries very patiently without getting angry. And we are really lucky to have him as our teacher. So, without wasting much time, I now invite Taude sir to please do the honors and release the patient information brochure. The title of this brochure is Leprosy Myths and Facts. Can we have the slide, please? Can you make it full screen, please? So this is our brochure, Leprosy Myths and Facts. It is both in English and Marathi, very easy to understand. And we now officially declare that the brochure is released. And now I invite Taude sir to say a few words on this occasion. Over to you, Taude sir.
Thank you, Dr. Dhanashri. Friends, good morning, everybody. I am very happy to note down that Pune chapter of Maharashtra branch of IADVL is doing extremely good work. They are not only working on academic field, but also not forgetting the social aspect of the dermatological disorder. And we are very happy to release a brochure on leprosy myths and facts prepared by our team. Friends, in 1980s, the leprosy was a miserable disease. At that time, a dapsone monotherapy was the only treatment, and leprosy was associated with multiple morbidity like depressed nose, claw hand, non-healing ulcers, and also various other abnormalities like blindness. And that led to stigma in the society. Most of the most of the patients were either needed admission in the hospital for the treatment, or few of them required to get admitted in the asylum, and that was a miserable situation. But in 1981-82, MDT was started, and because of MDT, that is multi-drug regime, the scenario was changed. Now in last 40 years, the morbidity has become less. The number of new cases have become less. Even though leprosy has not been eradicated from our country or from the world, there's the fear of the leprosy has definitely become less. And that was the real dream of Mahatma Gandhi. Mahatma Gandhi was the only political leader who was associated with leprosy. He had done lot of seva of Parture Shatri, who was suffering from leprosy. Because of his interest in leprosy, one Mr. Dr. Jagdishan decided to start a leprosy asylum. I'm not leprosy asylum, and he asked Mahatma Gandhi to come and inaugurate that particular asylum. Mahatma Gandhi only wrote 3 sentences as the answer. Thank you very much for inviting me. I will not like to come to inaugurate the opening of the asylum started by you. However, if you decide to close down this asylum one day, I will be happy to close down it, and I will come to close down it. So it was his dream that in India we will not require asylums or the hospitals for the leprosy patient, and therefore we celebrate the death anniversary of Mahatma Gandhi as the anti-leprosy day, and not only one day but 7 days from 30th of Jan to 5th of February. Friends, there are various members of our society, various members of our team are also worked in leprosy in last so many years. I must mention them on this forum. Dr. B.B. Gokhale, Dr. Arvind Lonkar, Dr. Vitthal Jadhav, Dr. Anil Patki, who worked in leprosy hospital of Kondwa. Similarly, Dr. Girish Afade and Dr. Sudhakar Grandi worked for GLRA program, that is Urban and Rural Education Program. Similarly, Dr. Rajiv Shah, Dr. Damre worked for Anand Gram, which was started by Patwardhan. So their contribution we will never forget. Today, this actually a brochure was to be released at the hands of Dr. Vittal Jadhav, who was president of Indian Association of Leprologists. Unfortunately, for some reason, he cannot attend today's program, but we will remember his contribution to this field. Friends, with these few words, I thank you very much and hand over again to the organizer. Thank you.
Uh, Thank you, Taude sir, for being with us and doing the honors for the Team Pune chapter of IIDVL. We are really thankful to you. Thank you very much. With this, now we move ahead and we will just have a look at the brochure. If you can share it with us, Mr. Bhushan, and then Dr. Rashmi will take over and do some important announcements, after which we will start our CME. Thank you so much. So you can see that this is the first page of our brochure, leprosy myths and facts. And here we are giving the message that leprosy is curable. And in the center, you can see that we have purposely kept this picture where we have shown that this depicts that we all must join hands to minimize the stigma, and this is the theme of year 2020 of for World Leprosy Day, overturning the stigma of leprosy. So this rightly explains how we dermatologists can diagnose the cases early and be prepared and educate our patients and help them to lead normal life. Next slide, please. So you can just scroll it. It is available. So this is how we have prepared questions. Next one. This is in English language, but this is easy to understand for patients. Next one. And you can also see that it is also been translated in Marathi. And those of your patients who cannot read English, you can share this. So printouts can be kept in the clinic. You can ask the patient to click photographs. And going ahead with the Go Green policy, we have purposely not printed the brochure, but made it available as a soft copy on our website. You can anytime go there, download it, print it, and whatever you want to do, you can share it with your patients. So this is our team who worked hard to prepare the questions and to prepare this brochure, which will be useful in day-to-day practice. So thank you very much. And now I hand it over to Dr. Rashmi.
Thank you, ma'am. So a very important announcement, probably the most important, which will be welcomed by all. We're very glad to announce that our MMC accreditation process is underway, and mostly next CME onwards, we will have MMC credit hours allotted to us. For further updates, you can always check our website, that is the iidblpune.org. Over to you, Ritu, now.
Thank you, Dr. Rashmi. We will now begin with the scientific session. I would request the audience to keep their videos and mics switched off, and also request you to post your queries in the chat box during the sessions, which will be addressed at the end of the sessions. We'll start with the first speaker, who's Dr. Vijay Joshi. He's from BJ Medical College. He passed out in 2018 as the college topper, and he'll be presenting case series of intriguing adverse cutaneous drug reactions. Dr. Vijay Joshi.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you, ma'am, for the introduction. I would share my screen first. Respected faculties and my colleagues, a very good morning to all of you. I am Dr. Vijay Joshi, working as a junior resident 2 in the Department of Dermatology, Venerology and Leprosy, BJ Medical College, Pune. Before starting with this presentation, I would like to thank all my faculties for their valuable guidance in making of this presentation. The first case of a 52-year-old married male farmer who is hailing from a rural area, who presented to us, who was a seropositive for HIV and on highly active antiretroviral therapy since 2 years, who presented to us with the complaints of fever since 7 days, which was acute onset, high grade and continuous. It was not associated with any other constitutional symptoms. And he also presented with the generalized skin rash with peeling of skin since 7 days, which started from trunk and later involved the face and limbs. It was associated with multiple raw areas and skin exfoliation. The patient had intolerance to spicy food, burning micturition, redness of eyes, and lacrimation since 7 days. He reported no recent change in his ART regimen. On inquiring about the drug history, it was evident that the patient was already on highly active antiretroviral therapy since 2 years based on abacavir, lopinavir, and ritonavir combination. But 2 months back, he was clinically diagnosed by a private physician with lymph node tuberculosis based on his complaints of evening rise fever, loss of weight, and swelling in neck. And hence, he was given AKT based on INH, rifampicin, pyrazinamide, and ethambutol combination. The patient had promiscuous sexual behavior with multiple partners before being diagnosed as seropositive for HIV. On examination, the patient had facial edema, icterus, bilateral, immobile, fixed, and non-tender cervical, axillary, and inguinal lymphadenopathy, and hepatomegaly. On dermatological examination, the patient had skin denudation involving trunk, upper limbs, and lower limbs, which involved greater than 90% of the body surface area, along with skin tenderness. The patient demonstrated positive Nikolsky sign. The mucosae, that is oral, ocular, and genital, showed erosions with hemorrhagic crusting. Here we can also see the cervical lymphadenopathy. So we put the differential diagnosis as query toxic epidermal necrolysis, DRESS syndrome with toxic epidermal necrolysis like rash, and DRESS and TEN overlap syndrome, which was probably induced by AKT. On investigations, hematological investigation showed increase in the total leukocyte count, and on the differential leukocyte count, there was neutrophilia which was observed. Eosinophil count was within normal limits. His CD4 count was also 527 cells per cubic millimeter. His liver function tests were deranged, and his renal function tests were also deranged. On histopathology, it was seen that epidermis showed acanthosis and marked spongiosis and focal basal cell degeneration without any individual keratinocyte necrosis. The dermis showed congested capillaries with perivascular mononuclear cell infiltrate and the edema. It was reported as TAN-like changes. So we took a step towards reaching the final diagnosis and applied European Registry for Severe Cutaneous Adverse Reaction criteria, wherein he fulfilled the criteria as hospitalization, the reaction which was suspected to be drug related, the rash which was acute in onset, the fever which was greater than 38 degrees Celsius, lymphadenopathy at minimum of 2 sites, and involvement of one internal organ. Here we had liver and kidney involvement in our case. So 6 out of 7 Rajskar criteria were fulfilled. Before restarting AKT for his lymph node tuberculosis, we really wanted to revisit the cause of lymphadenopathy. And we referred the patient for biopsy of the lymph node. And here it was revealed that there were some astonishing facts. The patient was really not suffering from the lymph node tuberculosis, but the real culprit behind this was diffuse large B-cell lymphoma. The lymph node biopsy showed complete effacement of the architecture, lymph node which was replaced by monotonous population of large cells admixed with intermediate cells with mitosis. And on immunohistochemical staining, there was strong positivity for CD20, there was diffuse positivity for BCL2, and there was focal positivity for BCL6. MIB1 labeling index was high. This diagnostic conundrum was decoded as a DRESS syndrome with TEN overlap syndrome, which was probably induced by AKT in an HIV seropositive male with diffuse large B-cell lymphoma. The patient satisfied the criteria for probable DRESS syndrome, that is 6 out of 7 Rajskar criteria. The validation score will be depicted later. And he fulfilled the criteria for definite toxic epidermal necrolysis, having generalized skin peeling, tenderness, Nikolsky sign, mucosal erosions, and based on the biopsy findings. Here, the diagnostic pitfall was a erroneous diagnosis of extrapulmonary lymph node tuberculosis in PL-HIV patient, whereas the real cause of lymphadenopathy was diffuse large B-cell lymphoma. The patient was treated with IV dexamethasone 8 milligrams per day, equivalent to prednisolone 60 milligram, which was tapered to tablet prednisolone 40 milligram per day over the next 2 weeks. On withdrawal of AKT, the complete resolution of cutaneous and systemic features was seen in about 20 days. ART was continued in the same doses, and chemotherapy was administered for his non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. So in the discussion, DRESS syndrome is an acronym for drug reaction with eosinophilia and systemic symptoms. Here, eosinophilia may not be always present, like in our case. Hence, the better nomenclature would be drug-induced hypersensitivity syndrome. Here, the rash typically occurs 2 to 6 weeks after drug initiation. It is a rare idiosyncratic and multisystemic entity. Mortality is around 5 to 10%, most commonly due to fulminant hepatic failure. This is a list of drugs causing DRESS syndrome. Herein, there is antimicrobials including ampicillin, dapsone, AKT drugs, minocycline, sulfa drugs, and vancomycin. Anticonvulsants, which are aromatic anticonvulsants, antivirals like abacavir, nevirapine, antidepressants like fluoxetine, antihypertensives like captopril, and others including NSAIDs, allopurinol. Toxic epidermal necrolysis, also known as Lyle syndrome, is a potentially life-threatening disorder involving greater than 30% of the body surface area, which lies in the spectrum of Stevens-Johnson syndrome and toxic epidermal necrolysis transition and toxic epidermal necrolysis spectrum. Its etiopathogenesis is linked to the HLA haplotypes, which increases individual susceptibility to develop this syndrome. The mean onset between drug exposure and the rash is 14 days, but it can range from 1 to 45 days. Here, there is a role of cytotoxic T cells, interferon gamma, and increased interaction of FAS and FAS ligand interaction, causing apoptosis of the keratinocytes. This is a list of drugs implicated in the TEN, which include sulfonamide antibiotics, then aromatic anticonvulsant, antiviral drugs, antibiotics like cephalosporin, fluoroquinolones, vancomycin, penicillins, doxycycline, erythromycin, and ciprofloxacin, allopurinol, antitubercular drugs, and NSAIDs. Overlap syndrome is an entity of severe cutaneous adverse reaction where they are scored on the basis of clinical, biological, and histological parameters as definite, probable, possible, and excluded. A true overlap is considered when individual severe cutaneous adverse reaction either meets probable or definite criteria. So in our case, the DRESS met a score of 5 on the validation score. This is a Rajskar validation score, and hence it was a probable DRESS. A score 10 was applied, and the patient scored 3, depicting the mortality of around 36% on admission, so indicating poor prognosis. The overlap syndromes are important to know because they pose a diagnostic puzzle. They have a more severe clinical picture as compared to the individual scar. They have a complicated management and poorer prognosis. How does HIV seropositivity affect drug interactions is via either immune dysregulation, probably viral drug interactions due to polypharmacy, different drugs having different side effect profile. Non-Hodgkin's lymphoma is known to be an independent risk factor for development of severe cutaneous adverse reaction. So in our patient, he had 2 such factors, that is HIV as well as non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, which resulted in overlap scar. Naranjo's algorithm of adverse drug reaction probability was applied, and he scored a score of 6, which fits into a probable criteria for drug association. This is the end of case 1. Now we will go to another interesting case 2, where a 28-year-old male married uneducated shopkeeper who hailed from rural area presented to us with fever since 8 days, which was acute, continuous, and high grade. associated with facial swelling. It was not associated with any other constitutional features. He also developed itchy reddish skin rash started from trunk, limbs, and face since 6 days. The rash did not have any fluid-filled lesions or waxing or veining. There was intolerance to food, ocular burning, and watering, with burning micturations with raw areas in these areas since 4 days. On inquiring the treatment history, the patient was given tablet cefixime by outside practitioner in a dose of 200 mg BD for 7 days prior to the onset of rash for his antecedent complaints of sore throat, and the patient had discontinued the tablet. Despite that, the rash worsened. Past personal and family history were non-contributory. On examination, the patient had facial edema, bilateral cervical lymphadenopathy, and other systemic examination was normal limit. On dermatological examination, the face, trunk, upper limbs, and lower limbs had exfoliating dusky erythematous maculopapular rash. Oral, ocular, and genital mucosae showed erosions with crusting. Scalp, palms, and soles were spared, and there was no skin tenderness or erosions or vesicular bullous lesions. So we put a provisional diagnosis of drug-induced hypersensitivity syndrome. On investigation, there was observed increase in total leukocyte count, a deranged liver function test. Absolute eosinophil count was greater than 1000 cells per cubic millimeter. Fever lab was within normal limit, and radiological examination revealed hepatomegaly on USG abdomen. Skin biopsy depicted a perivascular lymphocytic infiltrate and eosinophilic infiltration in the superficial dermis. We applied the Japanese Severe Cutaneous Adverse Reaction Score for this case, and it fulfilled 5 out of the 7 criteria from J-star. It includes prolonged clinical symptoms after discontinuation of the causative drug, fever greater than 38 degrees, liver abnormalities, leukocytosis, and lymphadenopathy. In this case, the rash was maculopapular, but it did not develop greater than 3 weeks after starting the drug, as well as HHV6 reactivation could not be demonstrated. Hence, patient was designated as atypical drug-induced hypersensitivity syndrome, which was probably induced due to cephalosporins because he met 5 out of 7 criteria. Patient was admitted in ICU, and because the rash did not resolve on discontinuation of the drug by patient, he was administered rapidly tapered course of intravenous dexamethasone 6 mg. Complete resolution of rash occurred 7 days after treatment, and normalization of lab parameters was seen 21 days later. Now we present with case 3, which is a 32-year-old married salesman hailing from urban area who presented with complaints of fever since 5 days, which was acute, remittent, and high grade. It was also not associated with chills, myalgia, arthralgia, or any other systemic findings. Reddish, itchy, generalized skin rash was developed since 5 days, which started from trunk and spread towards limbs and face. It was associated with only slight exfoliation of skin, but there were no fluid-filled lesions. Treatment history revealed that the patient was consuming tablet cefpodoxime 200 mg BD for 5 days, which was prescribed for a furuncle over his leg by a private practitioner. Past personal and family history were non-contributory. On examination, bilateral cervical lymphadenopathy was seen. Systemic examination was within normal limit. On dermatological examination, the trunk, upper limbs showed diffused dusky, confluent morbilliform rash. The face, scalp, palms, and soles were relatively spared, and the mucosae were spared. We put a provisional diagnosis of query drug-induced hypersensitivity syndrome. On investigations, the total leukocyte count was raised. Absolute eosinophil count was 1250 cells per cubic millimeter. Liver function tests were deranged. The other fever lab was normal, and USG abdo-pelvis showed hepatomegaly. We considered a final diagnosis of atypical drug-induced hypersensitivity syndrome, which was probably induced due to cephalosporins, based on earlier mentioned J-scar criteria. As the patient had not stopped cefpodoxime himself, we stopped it, but still the rash did not resolve. Hence, we administered intravenous dexamethasone 6 mg IV with rapid tapering of dose over 10 days, wherein marked clinical improvement occurred 10 days later with gradual normalization of the lab parameters. In the discussion, we will have a common discussion about case 2 and case 3. Drug reaction with eosinophilia and systemic symptoms where eosinophilia may not be always present. Hence, more appropriate nomenclature would be drug-induced hypersensitivity syndrome. It was earlier called phenytoin anticonvulsant hypersensitivity syndrome or drug-induced pseudolymphoma. The rash has an onset of 2 to 6 weeks after drug initiation, and mortality is around 5 to 10%. The pathogenesis exactly is unknown, but a genetic component altering the immune response, a triggering factor, most often a viral infection, and a defect in the drug metabolism resulting in failure to eliminate the drug intermediates are the factors which are proposed. HHV6 was earlier thought to be a causative virus, but now it is known that Epstein-Barr virus, human herpes virus 6, human herpes virus 7, and cytomegalovirus are the viruses which have a sequential reactivation, hence predisposing a patient to developing DRESS syndrome. However, in our setting, which was resource poor, reactivation of HHV6 or 7 could not be demonstrated. It can have variable presentation, including maculopapular, like in our case, exfoliative dermatitis like, pustular, erythema multiforme like, Stevens-Johnson syndrome like, and toxic epidermal necrolysis like being the rarest. Differential diagnosis for this syndrome are exfoliative dermatitis, Stevens-Johnson syndrome, toxic epidermal necrolysis for the vesiculobullous presentations, acute generalized xanthomatous pustulosis, Dapsone hypersensitivity syndrome. This is a list of common causative drugs which are responsible for the DRESS syndrome. Here in the antimicrobials, we can see that the cephalosporins have not been mentioned as a common cause for DRESS syndrome. So where do the cephalosporins stand? They are a very rare cause of DRESS syndrome, wherein few cases have been reported in the literature. They may not fulfill the criteria for a typical, hence atypical drug-induced hypersensitivity syndrome J-SCAR criteria may need to be applied for such cases. They may present with early onset of rash as against the greater than 3 weeks criteria which is mentioned in J-SCAR. And our case, the rash was maculopapular, but it appeared early, hence making it atypical. Naranjo's algorithm was applied to this case and he scored 7 out of 14 criteria, hence a probable association with the drug was implicated. This is end of case 2 and case 3. Now we will go to the last interesting case. A 48-year-old married male laborer who hailing from a rural area presented with reddish itchy rash over groin, axillae, buttocks and body folds and since 4 days, which was acute in onset associated with burning in these areas. But the rash had appeared 5 hours after following ingestion of some drug which was prescribed by a general practitioner for sore throat. Now this rash was followed 2 days later by fluid-filled lesions over the same areas. There was no history of fever, oral intolerance to food, ocular burning, burning micturition, any other systemic complaints, topical application or any such previous episodes. On treatment history, the patient had taken a drug where the details are not known for his sore throat as mentioned earlier. Past history was non-contributory. On inquiring personal history, the patient had promiscuous sexual behavior. On examination, the dermatological examination revealed lateral trunk, then axillae, then inner thighs in a V-shaped fashion, and the body folds and the neck. They showed multiple symmetrical, ill to well-defined erythematous macules and erosions with bullae, large flaccid bullae. Palms and soles were not involved. Mucosae were not involved. Systemic examination was within normal limit. Here we can see that the eruption is symmetrical and well-defined. The differential diagnoses which were considered are symmetrical drug-related intertriginous and flexural exanthema and bullous Frick's drug eruption, Stevens-Johnson syndrome. On investigation, hematological investigations were within normal limit. He tested seropositive for HIV-1 and the CD4 count was 200 per microliter. Radiological examinations were within normal limit. On examining skin biopsy, epidermis showed the partial detachment with detachment of superficial layers in the subcorneal plane, mild spongiosis, irregular acanthosis. The dermis showed perivascular mononuclear infiltrate with a slight without any eosinophils, which was consistent with the SDRI-FE. On treatment with tablet prednisolone 40 mg per day, the patient had marked resolution of the rash, which healed with post-inflammatory hypopigmentation, as we can see in these figures. The patient was started on HART, that is TLE regimen, and he was administered tablet cotrimoxazole double strength in a BD dose for pneumocystis jirovecii pneumonia prophylaxis. To our surprise, after starting the cotrimoxazole, 5 to 6 hours later, the itching, reappearance of erythematous macules and multiple vesicles over the pre-existing affected areas was observed. So hence, it acted as an inadvertent drug provocation with cotrimoxazole, which helped us cleanse the diagnosis. Here, the culprit drug was probably cotrimoxazole or probably any related sulfa drug which was administered for his prior sore throat. This diagnostic puzzle was decoded as SDRIFE, prior called as baboon syndrome, based on 5 criteria. Exposure to a systemically administered drug, either for the first time or with repeated doses, sharply demarcated erythema of the gluteal perianal area and V-shaped erythema of the inguinal perigenital area, and involvement of at least another intertriginous or flexural location, symmetrical involvement of these areas, and no systemic involvement. Our patient fulfilled all the 5 criteria. Further intervention was done with discontinuation of cotrimoxazole, and prednisolone was administered in a dose of 40 milligram again. Patient was advised to discontinue cotrimoxazole and other sulfa drugs in the future, and ART was continued without complications. In the discussion, symmetrical drug-related intertriginous and flexural exanthema, which was previously called baboon syndrome, because of the red rump of the baboons, where the rash characteristically appears. Now it is known to be a distinct subtype of systemic contact dermatitis. Erythema over the flexural and intertriginous areas with involvement of one large body flexure is seen, most common cause being beta-lactam antibiotics, but characteristically there is absence of systemic features. Etiopathogenesis is linked to beta-lactams, which are most common. Non-beta-lactam antibiotics, here there is a place for Septra, that is cotrimoxazole in our case, but even macrolides are implicated. Other anti-infective agents include nystatin, terbinafine, fluconazole, itraconazole, which is very commonly prescribed these days, and metronidazole. Other drugs are also there, and monoclonal antibodies like infliximab and topical agents are also implicated. The pathomechanism is type 4 hypersensitivity reaction, although it is not clearly known. Clinicopathological differentials include acute generalized xanthematous pustulosis for the pustular variant of SDRIFE, bullous drug eruptions like erythema multiforme, fixed drug eruptions, Stevens-Johnson syndrome, toxic epidermal necrolysis, lichen dermatitis, and neutrophilic dermatosis. Naranjo's algorithm was applied in this case, and he scored a score of 9, assessing the definite causality for the drug in our case. So the purpose of this presentation is to highlight the rare but not rare cutaneous eruptions that we encountered. One must have a bird's eye view for decoding such diagnostic mysteries, because even commonly prescribed drugs can have atypical morphologies. Thank you. I would like to thank IADVL Pune chapter and Dr. Dhanashree Bhide madam for giving me this opportunity to present here. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Vijay, for a wonderful presentation. The cases were truly intriguing in terms of arriving at the correct diagnosis of overlap syndromes and drug-induced hypersensitivity syndromes. Now we move on to our next speaker, Dr. Ranjita, who is also JR2 from BJ Medical College. She will be delivering a talk on decoding a rare phenomena, conversion or coexistence. Dr. Ranjita?
Thank you, ma'am, for the introduction. I'll start sharing my screen now. Good morning, all the respected faculty and my colleagues. Myself, Dr. Ranjita K from Department of Skin and BD, BJ Government Medical College, Pune. Today, I'll be sharing our institution and we'll try to decode this rare phenomenon, which might be a conversion or a coexistence. Coming to the case report, a 30-year-old male presented to us with history of multiple fluid-filled lesions all over the body since 2 months. The lesions ruptured, forming raw oozing areas over trunk, extremities, scalp, and oral mucosa. And the lesions had little tendency for spontaneous healing. There was history of oral intolerance to spicy food and lesions over the oral mucosa as well. Patient denied any history of photosensitivity, antecedent intake of drugs, or history of similar complaints in the past. Patient did not take any form of treatment for the existing skin lesions. On clinical examination, there were multiple flaccid bullae and extensive erosions over trunk, back, scalp, and limbs. There were erosions with crusting over palms and limbs. Marginal Nikolsky sign was positive. The mucosal examination showed multiple erosions over buccal mucosa. Ocular and genital mucosae were within normal limits, and the nails were unremarkable. So we arrived at a provisional diagnosis of pemphigus vulgaris with a pemphigus area and activity score of 12.6 based on the history and clinical findings. Laboratory investigations like complete blood count, liver function tests, renal function tests, urine routine and microscopy were within normal limits. His tuberculin skin test was negative, HIV ELISA was negative, chest X-ray and ultrasonography of abdomen and pelvis were within normal limits. Histopathological examination of the skin lesions were done. On H&E staining, we could see a suprabasal split and acantholysis with a row of tombstone appearance of basal layer of keratinocytes with mild perivascular dermal infiltrate of lymphocytes and few neutrophils. So we confirmed our diagnosis of pemphigus vulgaris. Because of the financial restraints, we could not do an immunofluorescence study in this patient. And he was administered injectable dexamethasone cyclophosphamide mesna pulse therapy Pashricha regimen, which includes injection dexamethasone 100 milligrams intravenously on days 1, 2, and 3, with injection cyclophosphamide 500 milligrams on day 2. He was also given tablet prednisolone 0.75 milligrams per kg per day in tapering doses. He was also given interpulse tablet cyclophosphamide 50 milligrams once a day. After 2 monthly doses of 500 milligrams of pulse therapy, all the skin lesions resolved with hyperpigmentation. The patient was in continuous follow-up with us every fortnight, and at a follow-up visit for third cycle, he complained of multiple new intensely itchy raised lesions over scalp, trunk, and back. There was no history of any fluid-filled lesions or erosions on thorough inquiry, which suggested that these lesions appeared de novo. On examination, multiple well-defined erythematous plaques with micaceous silvery white scales involving the scalp, trunk, upper and lower limbs were seen. There was post-inflammatory hyperpigmentation over trunk, back and limbs. No vesiculobullous lesions, erosions or crusting were present. On mucosal examination, healing erosions were seen over buccal mucosa. Ocular and genital examination were within normal limits, and palms and soles were unremarkable. Nail examination showed multiple Bu's lines, onycholysis, and longitudinal melanonychia. So we arrived at a provisional diagnosis of pemphigus foliaceus and sebopsoriasis based on the morphology and the distribution of the lesions. Again, the laboratory investigations like complete blood count, liver function tests, renal function tests were within normal limits. Urine routine microscopy were also within normal limits. On histopathological examination, H&E stain of the lesions showed multiple parakeratosis, Monro's microabscesses, thinning of granular layer with regular elongation of rete ridges. There was sparse dermal perivascular infiltrate also seen. A final diagnosis of pemphigus vulgaris under treatment with plaque psoriasis with a body surface area involvement of 30% was done. And the patient was treated with plain IV cyclophosphamide pulse therapy, 500 milligrams Gokhale regimen, with interpulse tablet cyclophosphamide 50 milligrams once a day for his pemphigus vulgaris. He was started on tablet apremilast 30 milligrams per day with high potent topical corticosteroids and lipid paraffin for his psoriasis. So how can we explain the coexistence of these two dermatoses? Going through the literature, the earliest description of coexistence of bullous diseases and psoriasis were given by Dr. Bloom in the year 1929. An article published in the Frontiers of Medicine, where a meta-analysis was done with for the case reports with association of psoriasis and bullous diseases until the end of 2017, showed that bullous pemphigoid was the most commonly reported vesiculobullous disorder with psoriasis. The other disorders which were reported to be associated with psoriasis were pemphigus vulgaris, epidermolysis bullosa acquisita, Haley disease. So now let us go through the literature which showed where many autoimmune bullous disorders were associated with psoriasis. Linear IgA bullous disease, bullous pemphigoid, pemphigus foliaceus, dermatitis herpetiformis, epidermolysis bullosa acquisita, and cicatricial pemphigoid. Going through the review of the literature to know about the pathogenesis of these two dermatoses individually. Pemphigus vulgaris is a life-threatening immune-blistering disorder which is caused by anti-desmoglein 1 and/or 3 IgG autoantibodies. Acantholysis is said to be the mainstay in pemphigus vulgaris. Acantholysis is a term which is coined by Auspitz, which means loss of coherence among epidermal cells due to breakdown of intercellular bridges. Histopathologically, it forms intraepidermal clefts which appears clinically as vesicles and bullae. There are many proposed theories of pemphigus vulgaris. Let us go through the theories quickly. Theory of steric hindrance. According to this theory, pathogenic antibodies bind the amino-terminal extracellular domain of the desmogleins, which forms trans-adhesive interface between the cells. Desmoglein compensation theory is based on the distribution of desmoglein 1 and 3 antigens in skin and mucous membrane. So patient having autoantibodies to desmoglein 3 will have oral mucosal blisters and a suprabasal cleft in the histopathological examination of skin. And patients with autoantibodies to desmoglein 1, oral mucosa will not be affected and have superficial intraepithelial cleft on histopathological examination of skin. Multiple hits hypothesis suggests that apart from antibodies to desmoglein 1 and 3, patient will have antibodies against nicotinic acetylcholine receptor, pemfaxin, thyroperoxidase, and annexins. Antibody-induced apoptosis theory. According to this theory, binding of pemphigus IgG and anti-FAST receptor antibody increases the level of intracellular FAST receptors and FAST ligands, which causes a subsequent decrease in the level of BCL2 and the activation of caspase 1 and 3, which causes the cell to undergo apoptosis. Basal cell shrinkage theory was proposed by Briston and Grando, and according to this theory, binding of pemphigus vulgaris antibodies to keratinocytes triggers intracellular events which causes collapse of the structural cytoskeleton and consequent shrinkage of these cells. Shrinking of basal cells pulls them away from the suprabasal cells, causing a suprabasal acantholysis with tombstone appearance of the basal cells. According to apoptolysis theory, autoantibody binding causes activation of multiple intracellular signaling events, which causes basal cell shrinkage and protein degradation inside the suprabasal cells, causing the tombstone appearance of the basal cells and apoptolysis of the suprabasal cells. Quickly going through the pathogenesis of psoriasis. Psoriasis is a pathologic collaboration of T lymphocytes, dendritic antigen presenting cells like Langerhans cells and mature myeloid dendritic cell subsets. These cells cause activation of infiltrating T cells by cell-cell interactions, cause the development and maintenance of psoriatic plaque. So going through the pathogenesis shows that these two dermatoses are caused by two different limbs of the immune system. Pemphigus vulgaris mainly a B cell mediated disease and psoriasis being mainly a T cell mediated disease. So how can we explain the coexistence or the conversion of these two dermatoses? Most of the cases which were reported in literature had psoriasis initially and later developed pemphigus vulgaris. And the authors have contributed this to the ultraviolet radiation, specifically narrowband UVB therapy, which was given to the psoriatic patients, might have caused a microenvironment for the epidermal exposure of the desmoglein antigen and facilitated interactions in the immune system where the patients must have subsequently developed pemphigus vulgaris. So in our patient, he initially had pemphigus vulgaris and later developed plaque psoriasis. So can we attribute this phenomenon to what is known as epitope spread? Epitope is an antigenic determinant on a site on an antigen. And human body is evolved in such a way to identify as many antigens as possible to protect itself from the infections and malignancies. In epitope spread, tissue damage from a primary inflammatory process causes release of a previously sequestered antigen and causes exposure of this antigen, leading to a secondary autoimmune response against the newly released antigen. There are two types of epitope spread, intramolecular and intermolecular. In intramolecular type, the newer antigen is present on the same protein, whereas in intermolecular type, the newer antigen is present on a different protein. This concept of epitope spreading is said to have a role in multiple autoimmune diseases, and the hypothesized model is that infections might cause non-specific immune activation and an imbalance in regulatory cytokines. Also, trauma can cause exposure of multiple sequestered antigens. All these things together might lead to activation of lymphocytes, which are reactive to self-epitope and causing autoimmunity and organ damage. Another phenomenon which might explain our case is Wolff's isotopic response. In the year 1995, Dr. Ronnie Wolff and his associates published an article with where he reported a total of 58 cases where there was occurrence of a new skin disorder exactly at the site of another already healed unrelated disease, and called this term as isotopic response. And they gave the possible explanations for this Wolff's response. The first disease might have caused skin changes that led to the occurrence of a second disease at the same time, or each event was caused by a different stimulus, or it is just a coincidence that, and we are using our reasoning to make a connection between the two diseases, or a concept of locus minoris resistentiae, which literally translates to a site of lessened resistance. It is an area, structure, or an organ which offering little resistance to invasion by microorganisms or toxins. This concept of locus minoris resistentiae is related to two legendary mythological characters, Achilles' heel and Siegfried's shoulder. These two parts were the weakest parts of the warriors, and finally in the legend, they die when they are hurt at these parts. In the article published by Dr. Wolff, the first disease in most patients was herpes zoster, herpes simplex, varicella, or thrombophlebitis. And the second disease, which appeared exactly at the site of the heel disease, was in most reported cases a carcinoma or granuloma annulare. Additional diseases which appeared at the site of the first heel disease was Kaposi's sarcoma, pseudolymphoma, sarcoid, tinea, tuberculoid, and vasculitis granuloma, angiosarcoma, metastasis, Bowen's disease, lymphoma, leukemia cutis, and acne. So the initial viral infection or the non-viral injury might have caused release of multiple neurotransmitters and caused further activation of the T cells and the local vascular changes might have caused the limiting of immune response to the area and appearance of a new skin disease at the same site. So in our case, the healed primary disease like pemphigus might have caused a long-lasting immunological changes and rendered the skin vulnerable to a second disease like psoriasis. We faced a number of challenges in the management of this patient because systemic steroids, which were the frontline drugs for pemphigus vulgaris according to our institutional guidelines, were relatively contraindicated in this patient because of the risk of exacerbation or pustulation upon withdrawal. So the intravenous dexamethasone cyclophosphamide pulse, that is Pasricha regimen, was shifted to plain cyclophosphamide pulse Gokhale regimen by omitting the steroid component. In addition, apremilast served as an effective adjuvant for the psoriasis. So let us have a glimpse of other treatment modalities that can be used in such scenarios. Rituximab is one of the drugs which is widely used for the management of pemphigus vulgaris. In the year 2012, an article was published in Journal of American Academy of Dermatology, where a case of palmoplantar pustulosis was successfully treated with rituximab, which failed to respond to tumor necrosis alpha blockers. But there are again multiple reports of cases where patients developed psoriasis after they were treated with rituximab for pemphigus vulgaris, and the authors have attributed it to the B cell depletion, which is caused by rituximab and might have caused an abnormal activation of the T cells and led to the development of psoriasis in this genetically susceptible individuals. Azathioprine is also one of the drugs which is widely used for the management of pemphigus vulgaris. And in a study conducted done by Dr. Ramji Gupta, a total of 30 patients were given azathioprine pulse therapy, which consisted of 500 milligrams of azathioprine orally on 3 consecutive days monthly, with daily azathioprine of 100 milligrams. And at the end of the study, almost 21 patients were able to maintain remission for a period of 3 to 6 years, and 6 patients were able to maintain remission for 1 to 3 years. Azathioprine is also used in doses of 50 milligrams twice a day for 6 months in the management of psoriasis. A study done at AIIMS New Delhi by Dr. Verma and others, where azathioprine was used at a bolus dose of 300 milligrams weekly for 24 weeks in patients with plaque psoriasis with a PASI score of more than or equal to 10. And among the total of 28 patients who completed the treatment, almost 18 patients were able to achieve a post-treatment PASI score of 90%. Methotrexate is also one of the time-tested drug for the management of psoriasis, and there are articles published where methotrexate is successfully used in the management of pemphigus vulgaris. An article published in British Journal of Dermatology by Dr. Tran, where 23 patients were treated of pemphigus vulgaris were treated with weekly methotrexate. And at the end of the study, improvement in clinical symptoms was seen in 91% of the patients, and 70% of the patients were eventually weaned off prednisone, and 2 patients developed adverse effects, and 1 patient did not receive any therapeutic effect. Apremilast is also one of the drugs which is widely used for a number of dermatological conditions, and it is also used in psoriasis. We could find a case report where Apremilast was used successfully for a case of pemphigus vulgaris which failed to respond to rituximab. Going through the literature, we could find a single report of demonstrating the role of cyclophosphamide in the management of psoriatic arthritis. In our case, the treatment was given according to our institutional protocol and the financial constraints of the patient. Currently, the patient, both pemphigus vulgaris and psoriasis is controlled in our patient, and he is maintained on tablet.
Dr. Ranjita.
Yes, ma'am.
Dr. Ranjita.
Yes, ma'am.
We can't hear you, Dr. Ranjita.
Now, ma'am.
Ma'am, she's audible.
She's audible, ma'am.
I think there's some problem.
Shall I continue? Hello, I'm audible,
Yeah,
ma'am.
please continue.
Yes, please continue. Sorry.
Okay. Currently, both the disease dermatosis are well controlled, and patient is maintained on tablet Apremilast 30 milligrams twice a day and IV cyclophosphamide 500 milligrams pulse therapy monthly with interpulse tablet cyclophosphamide 50 milligrams per day. In the future, we are planning to taper him off cyclophosphamide and maintain him on Apremilast with monitoring his disease activity. To conclude, the present case illustrates the occurrence of psoriasis vulgaris over the healed lesions of pemphigus vulgaris and highlights the diagnostic and therapeutic hurdles that are associated with this unique scenario. More research is warranted to clarify the possible role of Wolff's isotopic response or the epitope spreading theory in the coexistence of these two seemingly unrelated dermatoses. These are my references, and I would like to thank all my faculty at Department of Skin, BJ Medical College, Pune, and also special thanks to Dr. Dhanashree Bide Madam and Pune Chapter IADBL for giving me this wonderful opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Ranjita, for a very nice and detailed presentation on coexisting dermatological disorder and their management.
Yes.
Before going on to the next session, I would again request the audience to post their queries in the chat box. The questions will be addressed at the end of all the sessions. Our next speaker is Dr. Urvi Rajgadkar. She's a junior resident from KEM Hospital, Pune, and she will be talking on trophic ulcer with syringofibroadenoma of Mascaro.
Thank you, ma'am, for the introduction. I'll start my screen sharing. Good morning, everyone. I'm Dr. Urvi Rajgadkar, and today I'll be presenting a rare case of trophic ulcer with syringofibroadenoma of Mascaro. A 73-year-old male came to the OPD with the asymptomatic growth on the dorsum of his foot since 5 months. It was associated with mild itching. He also had a non-healing ulcer over the first metatarsal head of the left foot since 6 years. History of present illness. 6 years back, the patient developed a non-healing ulcer over his left foot following a traumatic injury. He took medication from this, for the same on and off from private practitioners, but did not notice much improvement. 5 months back, he noticed a solid growth which was progressively increasing in size over the dorsum of his left foot. It was associated with mild itching. Past medical history, he was diagnosed with Hansen's disease 30 years back, and he received multi-drug therapy for the same. He completed his treatment and he was released from control. He is also known hypertensive and on medication for the same. Family history and personal history were not significant. General and systemic examination as well as vital parameters were all within normal limits. Moving on to dermatological examination, a single circular well-defined ulcer with healthy granulation tissue at the base is present over the first metatarsal head of the left foot, measuring 3 by 2 centimeters in size. This surrounding skin is thick and hyperkeratotic, and multiple flesh-colored nodules becoming confluent to form a larger mass is present on the dorsum of the foot, which is extending onto his toes, measuring 4 by 7 centimeters in size. It is firm, non-tender. The surrounding skin shows scaling and hyperpigmentation. The nails show yellowish discoloration and dystrophy, and intertrigo is present as well. Considering all the clinical features, we came to the following differential diagnosis: fibroepithelium of Pincus, eccrine poroma, eccrine papillary adenoma, acrosyringeal nevus, and elephantiasis nostris. Certain investigations were suggested so as to confirm the diagnosis and rule out the DTs. Um, Routine investigations were all within normal limits. A deep surgical biopsy and immunohistochemistry tests were suggested. On histopathology, the epidermis shows hyperkeratosis, hypergranulosis, and acanthosis. Also, long, thin, branching, anastomosing strands of basaloid cells are seen, which are embedded in a dense fibrous stroma. The strands are connected to the overlying epidermis. Many thin-walled, small capillaries are also seen in the stroma. Here are a few more low power and high power images. The H&E staining of the biopsy suggested two conditions: a fibroepithelium of Pincus and eccrine syringofibroadenoma. To confirm the diagnosis, a histochemistry tests were done. To confirm the eccrine gland origin of the lesion, immunohistochemistry analysis in the form of carcinoembryogenic antigen CEA was performed, and to confirm the epithelial cell origin, epithelial membrane antigen EMA was performed. EMA was diffusely positive in the epithelial cells of the strands, and CEA was negative. Now, to summarize the case, clinical features show multiple nodular flesh-colored swelling over the dorsum of his left foot. It is firm and non-tender. Also, there's a non-healing ulcer over the head of the first metatarsal. In investigations, a deep surgical biopsy is suggestive of reactive eccrine syringofibroadenoma. Immunohistochemistry, EMA was diffusely positive in the epithelial cells. CEA was negative. Now, ductal cells, they stain positive with S100, CEA, and CK19. However, in the presence of scarring, CEA and CK19 may be negative, like in our patient. Considering the clinical features as well as the investigations, we came to the final diagnosis of reactive eccrine syringofibroadenoma. Now we will be discussing the literature regarding this condition. So reactive eccrine syringofibroadenoma was discovered by Mascaro in the year 1963 among a series of lesions which were histopathologically diagnosed as fibroepithelium of Pincus, which is a pre-malignant rare neoplasm of eccrine acrosyringeal cells. However, ESFA is a benign condition. The clinical presentation is variable and can range from solitary to multiple papules, nodules, or hyperkeratotic plaques. The lesions may be verrucous, ulcerative, linear, or nevoid. Site of predilection is usually the extremities, but it can also affect the face, back, buttocks, and rarely nails. ESFA can occur as a reactive proliferation associated with other conditions like venous stasis, skin ulcer like in our patient, chronic lymphedema, burn scar, lepromatous leprosy, erosive palmoplantar lichen planus, bullous pemphigoid, etc. ESFA is classified into 5 types: solitary ESFA, then SHOP syndrome, in which multiple ESFA with hydrotic ectodermal dysplasia is seen, syringofibroadenomatosis, multiple ESFA without associated cutaneous findings, non-familial unilateral linear ESFA, also called as nevoid ESFA, and reactive ESFA, which is associated with inflammatory or neoplastic dermatosis. This is the histopathology picture seen in ESFA, where we can see proliferation of epidermis around the acrosyringium, which is extending onto the reticular dermis. We can see anastomosing vertical strands comprising of acrosyringeal structures like ductal cuboidal epithelial cells, which is embedded in a fibrovascular stroma. And here we can see a well-formed eccrine duct with a double-layered cuboidal cells. Now, immunohistochemistry, EMA, is usually done, suggested in this condition. It is a large cell surface mucin glycoprotein. It is expressed by glandular and ductal epithelial cells as well as certain hematopoietic cells. It is expressed highly by most adenocarcinomas. It is associated with a poor prognosis. CEA, it is also a glycoprotein which is found in the embryonic ectodermal epithelium. It is used to diagnose certain GI and rectal carcinomas. The treatment for this condition is complete surgical excision, surgical debulking, CO2 laser ablation, and radiotherapy. Now we will be comparing fibroepithelium of Pincus and eccrine syringofibroadenoma, which are two very clinically similar conditions. So FEP, it is a rare variant of basal cell carcinoma or trichoblastoma. It was described by Hermann Pincus in 1953, and it is usually a pre-malignant condition. Eccrine syringofibroadenoma, it is a adnexal tumor of eccrine origin described by Mascaro in 1963. It is a benign rare condition. Both these conditions show similar clinical features. However, FEP is usually affects the trunk, and ESFA usually affects the extremities in the elderly. Histopathology is also similar, except there are occasional luminal eccrine ducts which are seen in ESFA. FEP is usually associated with malignant carcinomas, and ESFA is associated with inflammatory and infective conditions like skin ulcers, lepromatous leprosy, burn scar, bullous pemphigoid, etc. FEP differential diagnoses include a melanocytic melanoma, pyogenic granuloma, lipoma, eccrine syringeal, reactive eccrine syringofibroadenoma, and ESFA differential diagnoses include a typical mycobacterial infection, deep mycosis, squamous cell carcinoma, fibroepithelioma of Pincus, and reticulated seborrheic keratosis. The treatment for FEP is complete surgical excision. The prognosis is good, and local destruction or metastasis is rare. And treatment for ESFA is surgical excision, etretinate, topical therapy, and CO2 laser ablation. These are my references, and this is my thank you note. I would like to thank IADVL Pune and Dr. Dhanashree Bhede ma'am for giving me this opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Urvi, for presenting a rare and very well worked up case of coexisting dermatological conditions. Thank you. Moving on to our next speaker is Dr. Vaibhav Patel, also from KEM Hospital, Pune. He passed out from Gujarat and will be talking on distinguishing lichen planus pemphigoides and bullous lichen planus. Dr. Vaibhav.
Thank you, ma'am, for the introduction. So I'm presenting these interesting cases which has a similar presentation with different diagnosis. Let's move to the first, which is a 63-year-old female presented with complaint of pruritic rash all over body since 3 months, fluid-filled lesions on the upper limb and lower limb since 2 days. She developed multiple itchy violaceous lesions all over body, excluding mucosa. She noticed new fluid-filled lesions on the extremities and the back since 2 days. She was given a form of antihistaminics, topical steroid, and moisturizing cream. She has no any drug history prior to the eruption. Her past history, personal history, and family history shows no any significant, and general examination and systemic examinations shows no any abnormality. Dermatological examination shows multiple violaceous papules and plaques present on the extremities and trunk. These vesicles and bulla over extremities on unaffected skin, generalized xerosis, excoriation marks, PIH present, palms, soles, scalp and nails not involved, oral genital conjunctival mucosa are spared. With this history and examination, we kept the differential diagnosis on the lichen planus pemphigoides, bullous pemphigoid, and the bullous lichen planus. Her hematological and biochemical investigations are within the normal limit. Her histological present picture shows hyperkeratosis, wedge-shaped hypergranulosis, marked hyperplasia with elongated pecs. In hyperwash, her biopsy shows spongiosis, marked basal cell vacuolar degeneration, lymphocytic exocytosis, subepidermal bulla containing many eosinophils, and superficial dermis shows infiltration and mononuclear cells with eosinophils. In this case, treatment was given in the form of oral corticosteroid, prednisolone 30 mg OD, methotrexate 7.5 mg once a week, folic acid 5 mg OD except on the methotrexate days, and the antihistaminic emollients, omeprazole, and calcium supplements. So this is the course of the disease in a 3 weeks of duration, which shows substantial improvement in the condition. To summarize this condition, clinical features are pruritic violaceous papules, tense bullae over extremities on uninvolved skin, mucosal involvement. Histopathology picture shows of lichen planus and bullous pemphigoid, which suggests the diagnosis of lichen planus pemphigoides. Let's move to the discussion. So coming to the discussion, lichen planus pemphigoides has a feature of lichen planus and plus pemphigoid. Pathogenesis is unclear but believed to result from liquefactive degeneration of keratinocyte caused by brisk lichenoid tissue reaction and subsequent exposure of autoantigens, which result in antibody formation. Lichen planus pemphigoides tends to be an acute, generalized, and followed by sudden appearance of a large bullae on both involved and uninvolved skin. It takes mean duration of about 8 weeks in a patient of lichen planus to develop vesiculobullous lesions of a lichen planus pemphigoides. Lichen planus pemphigoides bulla usually appear on the extremities. Bullous planus pemphigoides rarely seen in the pediatric age group. If it seems, half of the pediatric cases have involvement of the palms or soles. Childhood lichen planus pemphigoides has a higher predilection for male. This is in contrast to childhood bullous pemphigoid, which has a female preponderance. It is can be precipitated by PUA therapy and can evolve in a pemphigoid nodularis. The mean age group of the patients with lichen planus pemphigoides is lower than those with a classic bullous pemphigoid, and the course of the disease also tends to be less severe. Lichen planus pemphigoides has been reported to be induced by the medication like sinazine, captopril, ramipril, psoralen, and ultraviolet therapy. Histological picture shows epidermal blister similar to bullous pemphigoid. DIF shows linear basement membrane zone deposition of IgG and C3 in perilesional skin, which helps to distinguish lichen planus pemphigoides from bullous lichen planus. Microscopic studies reveal in the lichen planus pemphigoides deposition of IgG and C3 in the base of the bulla and not in the roof as found in the bullous pemphigoid. It is postulated that epidermal damage from liquefaction degeneration in the lichen planus exposes basement membrane antigens and a consequent stimulation of antibody production and development of lichen planus pemphigoids. We choose the treatment of systemic steroid with the methotrexate because prednisolone in a low dose, we started prednisolone in a low dose 0.5 mg per kg. It is highly effective but associated with high rates of relapse upon the discontinuation and should be combined with additional corticosteroid sparing agent. So we add the methotrexate in a dose of 7.5 mg per weekly. It is a steroid sparing but late acting, cost effective drug. It has a hematological effect. Pancytopenia can be prevented by the folic acid supplementation except methotrexate day. Other immunosuppressive agents are cyclosporin. Oral dose is 3 mg per kg per day. Give with the monitoring of blood pressure and renal function. Azathioprine is less preferred due to delayed response. Let's go to the second case, which is 10-year-old boy complained of multiple itchy raised lesions all over body since 2 months, multiple fluid-filled lesions on the upper limb and lower limb since 3 days, and oral lesions since 3 days. He developed multiple itchy raised papules over both forearms that gradually spread to trunk since 2 months, for which he applied neem paste, home-based remedy. He developed fluid-filled lesions over the pre-existing papules. Also, there was a development of lesions on the buccal mucosa. He was prescribed from the local doctor in form of oral steroid, oral antibiotic, and topical cream. And there is no any drug history prior to the eruption. Past history, personal history, and family history shows no significance. General examination and systemic examination, there is no abnormality detected. Dermatological examination shows multiple violaceous papules and plaque present on the extremities, trunk, buttocks, and face and neck. Multiple tens, vesicles, and bullae present over extremities, including palms and soles. All these vesicles and bullae present on involved and uninvolved skin. He is having scaly plaque on the lips and white lacy pattern present on the buccal mucosa. With this clinical feature and examination, we put two differential diagnoses. These are bullous lichen planus and lichen planus pemphigoides. His hematological and biochemical investigations are within normal limit. His histological picture shows basket wave orthokeratosis, hypergranulosis, sawtoothing of ratty ridges, subepidermal cleavage band-like dense lymphocytic infiltrate obscuring the dermoepidermal junction. Max Joseph space is evident. Extensive basal cell vacuolar degeneration, many necrolytic keratinocytes, severed bodies, and pigment incontinence also seen in the higher picture. Histopathologies are suggestive of bullous lichen planus. For this case, we given a treatment in form of prednisolone 20 mg OD, antihistaminics, and oral and topical antibiotic. Patient came after the 7 day of treatment for the follow-up with history of new lesions on the body. So we tapered the prednisolone and started cyclosporin in a dose of 3 mg per kg and given antihistaminics and emollient. So this is the course of disease in a 3-week, which can show substantial improvement. To summarize this condition, clinical features are pruritic violaceous papules and plaques, blisters within the papules, white lacy pattern on buccal mucosa, and histopathological picture shows feature of bullous lichen planus, which suggest clinically and histologically bullous lichen planus. Let's go to the discussion part. Bullous lichen planus refers to development of blisters within the papules, occurs due to severe liquefactive degeneration of the basal layer of the epidermis, leading to formation of large Max Joseph space, resulting in a subepidermal blister. Commonest site being the shin, followed by the upper limbs and thigh. The disease runs a chronic progressive course. So this is the summarizing table of the bullous lichen planus and the lichen planus pemphigoid. So in the bullous lichen planus has a feature of only lichen planus but in the lichen planus pemphigoides has a feature of both lichen planus and the bullous pemphigoid. In bullous lichen planus, development of blister within the papule of the lichen planus due to severe liquefactive degeneration of the basal layer of the epidermis. In lichen planus pemphigoides, dense blister occurs on both the lichen planus lesions and the unaffected skin due to damage to the basal cells in the lichen planus, unmasked hidden antigenic determinants leading to antibody formation and induction of blister. Site being the same for the both the condition, which is extremities. Histologically, in bullous lichen planus, there is a subepidermal bulla formation with typical changes of lichen planus. In lichen planus pemphigoides, there is a formation of subepidermal blister similar to bullous pemphigoid with the many eosinophils. DIF in the bullous lichen planus is negative. In the lichen planus pemphigoides, DIF shows linear deposition of C3 and IgG along the basement membrane zone. In both the cases, we didn't do the DIF due to the unaffordability of the patient, but clinically and histologically, both the cases shows the diagnosis of bullous lichen planus and the lichen planus pemphigoides. So this is my reference, and thank you, Department of Dermatology and Department of Pathology, KM Hospital, Pune. I'm thanking IIDVL Chapter Pune for giving me this opportunity, and Dr. Pide ma'am. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Weber, for both your cases, which can be sometimes confusing to diagnose during our routine dermatology practice. Now, moving on to our last speaker for the meeting. Our last speaker is Dr. Sumit Pete from Maharishi Markandeshwar Institute of Medical College, Ambala. He completed his MBBS in 2016 from D.Y. Patil Medical College, Pune, and he will be talking on analyzing anxiety and depression in vitiligo patients.
Thank you, ma'am, for the introduction. Good morning, everyone. So I'll share my screen now. Good morning, everyone. I'm Dr. Sumit Pete, a resident third year from Maharishi Markandeshwar Institute of Medical College, Ambala, Haryana. So I'll be presenting a study of anxiety and depression in vitiligo patients. So vitiligo is a chronic progressive autoimmune disease. Various multiple factors are implicated in the pathogenesis, but it is mostly autoimmune, genetic, and environmental. Vitiligo causes considerable impact on patients' psychosocial life, and it can very commonly cause anxiety and depression, especially if the lesions are present on the exposed parts. So what we did in our study was we evaluated the anxiety and depression levels in vitiligo patients using these two standardized scales, that is the Hamilton Anxiety Scale and the Hamilton Depression Scale. So this is our proforma, the Hamilton Anxiety Scale. So it basically has 14 questions, which are all scored on a scale of 0 to 4. So the total score is 56, and it is further, we can categorize patients based on their scores as 0 to 13 as normal, 14 to 17 as mild anxiety, 18 to 24 as moderate anxiety, and 25 to 30 as severe anxiety. And this was the proforma by which we evaluated depression. This is the Hamilton Depression Scale. So Hamilton Depression Scale, it consists of 17 questions. Eight questions are scored from 0 to 4, and 9 are scored from 0 to 2. So the total score was 54, and we can categorize patients as 0 to 7 score as normal, 8 to 13 as mild, 14 to 18 as moderate, 19 to 22 as severe, and more than 23 were very severe. So this study design included 75 cases of either sex, age group of 18 to 20, 18 to 60 years with vitiligo, and 75 controls which were healthy, age and sex matched. They were included in our study. So before applying the scales, we recorded the demographic parameters like age, sex, occupation, education, marital status, and region. And we also recorded the disease specific parameters like duration of the disease, percentage of body surface area, site of vitiligo, the type of vitiligo, and stability. So then we administered the Hamilton anxiety and Hamilton depression scales using the proforma, and the total score was recorded. So these were the results. Maximum patients were of 18 to 24 years of age, and mean age was 33.08. Females outnumbered males in our study, and 26 cases were graduates and higher. 32 cases were housewives or unemployed. 72% cases were married, and 64% cases were from urban region. 24% cases had the duration of disease was 1 to 8 months. Mean duration of disease was 4.08 years. 33% cases had 1 to 9% body surface area involvement. 52% patients had involvements of exposed areas like face and neck. 64% cases were of vitiligo vulgaris, and 62% were stable vitiligo. So these were our scores. Of the 75 cases, the Hamilton anxiety score was found to be 5.72 uh, versus the controls was found to be 2. So this value was highly significant. And also the depression score was found to be 6.04 compared to controls, which was 2.13. So the depression score was also highly significant. We further categorize the patients based on their scores as normal, mild, moderate, or severe. So what we found was that 86% cases had no anxiety. Of the 13% cases who had anxiety, 6% had mild anxiety, and 6% had moderate anxiety. No cases had severe anxiety. Among the controls, only 2.6% controls had anxiety. And according to the depression scale, we further categorize them as normal, mild, moderate, severe, or very severe depression. So 69% cases had no depression. Of the 30% cases with depression, 20% had mild depression, 8% had moderate depression, and 2.6% cases had severe depression. And among controls, only 5.3% cases had depression. So we found that these scores in cases, female cases was slightly higher than males, but it was not so significant. And also the depression scores in males were slightly higher than females, and this was also not significant. So the depression scale scores among semi-skilled or skilled professionals was highly significant compared to housewives and unemployed cases. Also, the scores among unmarried cases was higher compared to married, but it was not significant. And the scores among urban cases was higher than rural, but not significant. When we compared the scores according to body surface area, we found that the patients with scores more than with vitiligo more than 18% body surface area was higher than those with less than 18% body surface area. Significantly, raised scores were seen in patients with exposed parts like face and neck compared to patients who had no involvement of the exposed parts. And significantly higher scores were seen in patients with universal vitiligo compared to vitiligo vulgaris. And the scores were higher in progressive vitiligo compared to stable vitiligo, but it was not significant. So to summarize, the scores were higher in cases compared to controls, in cases of semi-skilled or skilled professionals compared to housewives and unemployed, in patients with exposed vitiligo compared to unexposed, and in patients with universal vitiligo compared to vitiligo vulgaris. So to conclude, vitiligo commonly affects the physical appearance without causing much systemic complications. But there is no single effective therapy for vitiligo, and response to treatment is variable. The prognosis is unpredictable, so many patients are left unsatisfied. There is a lot of stigma of vitiligo in the society. Patients may have difficulty in finding jobs and getting married, which can affect their quality of life. Hence, patients are very prone to psychiatric disorders. So, what we as dermatologists do is we mostly focus on the patient's repigmentation, and we mostly pay little attention to the psychological impact the disease causes on the patient. So, anxiety and depression is often overlooked. So, anxiety and depression can be effectively managed with cognitive behavioral therapy, stress management programs, and drugs. So instead of focusing only on repigmentation, if we also have some focus on proactive detection of anxiety and depression, it can improve the quality of life of the patient, and also it can improve the efficacy of treatment as a whole. Thank you. I would like to thank Dhanashree Bhede ma'am and IDVL Pune chapter for giving me this opportunity to present my paper. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Sumit. I would now like to congratulate all the speakers for their wonderful presentations and applaud their efforts. All the speakers will receive an official letter of participation on their emails. I also urge all the other students to volunteer and use this platform to showcase their talents. Our association is eager to organize many more such activities for students. We will now take up the questions from the audience. This question is for Dr. Vijay Joshi. Why were the IV steroids rapidly tapered in your cases?
Ma'am, IV steroids were rapidly tapered in our cases because their role is mainly indicated in the initial 24 to 48 hours of starting the disease starting of the disease onset, but they also increase the rate of sepsis and systemic infection. So only in the initial period, 24 to 48 hours, if started early, they have a good role, and then they were rapidly tapered to avoid chances like second systemic infection mainly.
But in cases of DRESS, if you rapidly taper it, the chances of relapses are very high.
Yes, ma'am. Actually, we had planned cyclosporine in our case of DRESS and TN overlap syndrome, but due to affordability reasons, cyclosporine was not given. And in the cases of DRESS syndrome, where the steroids were rapidly tapered because it showed it mainly showed atypical presentation, and there was no reactivation of HHV6 which could be demonstrated. So mainly because of atypical presentation, they were rapidly tapered, and they showed a clinical improvement after 10 days, and laboratory parameters also normalized within 3 weeks.
And there was no relapse.
Yeah,
there was no relapse. Yeah. No. Thank you, Dr. Vijay. Now there's a question for Dr. Ranjita.
Yes, ma'am.
Your case, by giving the steroids, did the steroids for pemphigus, did it flare up the pre-existing psoriasis?
That might have been, yes, that might have been the case, ma'am, because so we actually rapidly tapered him off and changed his pulse therapy from DCP, dexamethasone cyclophosphamide, to plain cyclophosphamide pulse. So giving the steroids initially might have aggravated the hidden psoriasis, or might have led to the development of psoriasis in this patient, ma'am. That could have been a cause also.
Thank you. Now, yes, this is a question for Dr. Urvi Rajgadkar. Urvi, is there a possibility of the trophic ulcer healing and the syringofibroadenoma disappearing with the healing of trophic ulcer, or it has to be excised since it is a reactive proliferation?
No, ma'am, it has to be excised since it's a reactive.
So in your case, did the trophic ulcer heal?
No, ma'am. The patient is diabetic also. So it's a long-standing non-healing ulcer.
And was the lesion excised?
Ma'am, actually, patient is taking treatment elsewhere now. He's not, so we are not able to keep a track.
I think that is all for the questions that we have. And thank you very much, all the speakers. I would now hand over to Dr. Rashmi for further proceedings.
Thank you,
Ma'am, there is
Ritu.
one question.
Someone wants to say something?
Yeah,
Ritu,
there is one more question, Ritu, in the chat box.
Yes.
Can you just go through it?
Wait.
It's for Dr.
Okay,
Sumit.
now there's a question for Dr. Sumit Pete. Are there any studies which have tried to show improved response to standard depigmentation treatment if anti-anxiety or antidepressants were added to the regimen? As we know, stress is one of the triggers for vitiligo.
I'll have to go through the literature. I haven't seen such a study, but I'll definitely try and search for a study which shows that if anti-anxiety drugs can improve vitiligo.
Okay. Thank you. Rashmi, you can take over.
Thank you. Thank you. It was a wonderful morning full of learning. I congratulate all the speakers. I would like to express my gratitude to a few people. I would like to thank Dr. Taude sir for helping us release the e-brochure today. And for the e-brochure, I would like to thank Dr. Sharad Mutalik sir, Dr. Sudhakar Grandi sir, who helped us in editing and making the brochure. I would also like to thank Advait Lele and Torrent Pharma, who made the brochure possible. Our academic partners, Cystopic Pharma, who made the CME smooth and glitch-free. And as always, our lovely audience and members who took out time from their Sunday morning and joined in great numbers. You keep encouraging us in all the endeavors and help us provide better and better CMEs. Thank you once again. We can now end the meeting.
Yeah. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And all the students have done a really wonderful job. All the presentations were good. I hope your friends are encouraged by your presentations. They come forward and they participate. And we want more of you to come forward and participate, volunteer. And we are there to organize such CMEs for you. So keep this in mind and tell your friends also to come forward. Thank you once again, all of you. And thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, ma'am.
Yeah, thank you so much.